The gymnasium had gone silent, and silence from 300 teenagers was its own kind of proof. Jiang Kai lay flat on the mat, one arm twitching, blood at the corner of his mouth. He hadn't even seen the fist that dropped him. 1 second he was sneering across the ring. The next, he was staring at the ceiling lights, wondering why his body wouldn't answer him. The coach stood frozen at ringside, whistle still between his lips, forgetting to blow it. Nobody clapped. Nobody moved. A boy who should have been the youngest, weakest fighter in the room had just ended a match before it started, and the only thing louder than the silence was the thought running through every head in that gym at once. What is he? His name was Lin, 12 years old, according to his school records. Ordinary parents, ordinary house, ordinary grades that were somehow never quite ordinary enough to explain what people had just watched. To understand how a boy that age could do that with one punch, it helps to go back much further than this gymnasium. Back past the schoolyard, past the kidnappers, past the thing with too many teeth that once tore a grown man apart in a police captain's office. Back to the beginning, back to the day Lin was born, and immediately realized something was very wrong. He remembered dying. That part never faded, no matter how many years passed in this new body. There had been pain, then cold, then nothing, and he'd expected the nothing to stay. Instead, he woke up wrapped in a blanket, blinking under fluorescent lights, unable to speak, unable to walk, trapped inside a body that couldn't even hold up its own head, a newborn. His own mind, fully awake, folded into an infant that cried when it was hungry and slept 16 hours a day. Most people would have panicked. Lin spent the first few weeks doing something closer to research. He listened to his new parents talk. He learned their names, their habits, the small rituals of the house he'd been dropped into. His mother hummed the same 3 notes every time she changed his diaper, like she didn't even notice she was doing it. His father came home smelling faintly of metal and grease, some kind of mechanic's work, and always checked on the crib before he took off his shoes. They loved him already. That much was obvious. What wasn't obvious, not yet, was the world they'd brought him into. The system appeared on his 3rd night. There was no warning, no flash of light, nothing dramatic, just a plain box of text that seemed to hang in his vision, visible only to him, calm, and almost bureaucratic in tone. It offered him a body that could grow stronger the more he trained it. It offered rewards for effort. It offered, in the driest possible language, a way to become something more than the fragile infant he currently was. Lin decided, lying there in his crib, that he would take it seriously. Most babies flail their limbs at random. Lin flailed his on purpose. Every twitch of a tiny fist, every kick against the mattress, he treated like a rep in a workout, and the system noticed. Small numbers ticked upward in the corner of his vision. Strength, endurance, reflexes. Nothing that would impress anyone watching, but nothing that should have existed in a baby that young either. His parents called him a good sleeper, a strong latch, a healthy boy. They had no idea their son was quietly designing his own training program before he could crawl. By the time he learned to walk, he could already do it better than most toddlers twice his age. He waited 2 extra weeks before showing them, pacing it out on purpose, because a baby that stood up and marched across the room on his first try would raise questions he wasn't ready to answer. He'd learned patience in his old life. Apparently it carried over. His parents chalked it up to genius. Early walker, early talker, unusually calm for a baby, every milestone he hit a little faster than expected got filed under the same comforting explanation. Lucky, gifted, blessed with a smart kid. None of them guessed the truth. That gap between what they believed and what he actually was would only widen with time, and Lin let it widen, because the alternative was terrifying to imagine. A world with monsters wasn't a place you wanted your secrets slipping out early. He learned about that world in pieces, the way a child does, except he understood every piece the moment he heard it. The television in the living room wasn't just background noise to him. It was intelligence gathering. There were beasts now, not myths, not stories, actual creatures, warped by something people called aberrant energy, roaming farmland and forest edges, and sometimes closer than that. There were humans who fused their bodies with animal genes to fight back, gaining claws or scales or strength no ordinary person could match. There were cyborgs, built from steel and wiring, hunting the worst of the beasts for the government. Rank mattered more than money in this world. Strength decided who lived through the next crisis, and who didn't. Lin absorbed all of it silently from his high chair, spoon in one hand, comprehension in his eyes that no adult in the room noticed, because nobody expects a 2-year-old to be taking notes on gene fusion. By the time he reached kindergarten, his body had already outgrown what any doctor would call typical, though carefully, quietly, in ways that stayed hidden under a school uniform. He could run faster than his classmates. He could lift things a small boy shouldn't lift. He kept most of it locked away, saved for when he actually needed it. That need came sooner than expected, in the form of a girl named Han Han. She was small, loud when she wanted to be, and completely unafraid of him, even after she noticed he was strange in ways she couldn't name. She shared her crayons before he asked. She saved him a seat at lunch without being asked either. It was the kind of easy, uncomplicated kindness that didn't come with conditions, and Lin, who had once been an adult with adult friendships full of conditions, found himself oddly moved by it. The first time older kids cornered her by the sandbox, calling her names because her family didn't have much money, Lin didn't think it through. He just walked over. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He grabbed the ringleader's wrist hard enough that the boy's face went white, and something in his eyes made 3 bullies decide, almost simultaneously, that the sandbox wasn't worth it anymore. They scattered without looking back. Han Han stared at him afterward, like she was seeing him for the first time, even though they'd known each other for months. From that day, she followed him around like it was simply understood between them, and Lin let her. He protected her again, more than once over the following years, quietly, without turning it into a story he told anyone. It became one of the few steady things in his strange double life. A friend who liked him for reasons that had nothing to do with power, or bloodline, or system notifications, just because he'd chosen to be kind to her once, and kept choosing it. Bai arrived in his life a little later, and she was nothing like Han Han. Where Han Han was loud, Bai was quiet, in a way that made people nervous around her without knowing why. She had this presence, faint but unmistakable, like standing near a window left open in winter. Some kids avoided her outright. Others made her the target of exactly the kind of cruelty that quiet, different children usually attract. Lin noticed her before he ever spoke to her. He noticed the way she flinched at loud noises, the way she wore the same necklace of small carved fangs every single day, tucked under her collar like she was hiding it on purpose. He noticed, too, the way certain classmates had started treating her like something to mock, rather than someone to know. It came to a head one afternoon when a group of them cornered her in the classroom after most students had already left, and by the time Lin walked back in for a forgotten bag, she was standing there, red-faced, humiliated, saying nothing, while 3 other kids laughed at something about her family, her mother, her strangeness. He didn't shout, he simply told the ringleader, in a flat voice that didn't match a boy his age, that this stopped now, and something about how he said it made the boy's laughter die in his throat. Bai looked at him afterward with an expression he couldn't quite place. Not gratitude exactly, more like disbelief that someone had bothered. They became something close to friends after that. She didn't talk much, but she listened, and there was a strange comfort in her company that Lin didn't examine too closely at the time. She let a few things slip, small details that didn't fit. A mention of somewhere she called home that wasn't a house. A habit of watching the moon like it meant something specific to her. A way of moving that was just slightly too smooth for an ordinary child. He filed those details away without pushing. Some instinct told him not to ask directly, that whatever she was carrying, she'd share it when she was ready. She never got the chance. One week she was there, sitting 2 seats over, running her thumb along that necklace of small carved fangs. The next week, her desk was empty, and it stayed empty. No transfer notice, no goodbye, no note. Teachers gave vague answers about a family situation. Han Han asked around and got nothing solid either. Lin kept her seat in his memory a lot longer than the school kept it empty for real, and the mystery of where she'd gone, and what she'd actually been, settled into the back of his mind like a splinter he couldn't quite dig out. He would think about that necklace again, much later, once he finally understood exactly what those small carved fangs were for. But that understanding was still ahead of him. Right now, in those early years, the world outside the schoolyard was already sharpening its teeth, and it wouldn't stay outside for much longer. The danger arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, which somehow made it worse. Lin was walking home from the library, a stack of books under one arm, when a car slowed beside him on the empty side street. Two men got out, casual at first, the way predators are casual right before they aren't. One asked for directions. The other circled wide, cutting off his path to the main road. Lin had read enough by then to know what this was. Children from ordinary families sometimes vanished in this world, sold to people who wanted test subjects for gene experiments, or worse, sacrifices for things that worshipped beasts instead of hunting them. He'd hoped, in some quiet corner of his mind, that being careful would be enough to avoid ever finding that out firsthand. It wasn't. Not that day. The red-haired one grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise, already reaching for something in his jacket, a cloth or a needle. Lin didn't wait to find out which. He drove his elbow into the man's ribs with more force than any child's elbow should carry, and the man folded like paper, gasping, letting go on instinct. The second one froze for half a second, staring at a 12-year-old who'd just dropped a grown adult without breaking stride, and that half second was the only opening Lin needed. He swept the man's legs out and slammed him into the pavement. It should have ended there. A quiet victory, an unremarkable street, two kidnappers groaning on the ground, and one very calm boy walking away with his library books. Instead, the red-haired man started to change. His breathing turned ragged, wrong somehow, and his spine arched in a way that made a wet, cracking sound. Lin backed off instantly, every instinct screaming that this wasn't human anymore, and he was right. Fur split through skin. Teeth pushed forward past what any jaw should hold. Within seconds, something crouched on the pavement that used to be a man, snout twitching, eyes gone black and glassy. Aberrant beasts didn't usually walk around wearing human faces first. This was something else. A heretic, the news called them later, someone who'd taken beast genes into their body and lost the fight to control them, turning into a monster mid-transformation with no warning at all. The creature lunged, and Lin barely got clear, rolling across gravel that tore his sleeve and scraped skin raw underneath. He was fast. He was strong for his age. He was still, underneath everything, a child's body against a full-grown monster. And for the first time since he'd woken up in that crib years ago, he understood exactly how close training could still fall short of surviving. That was when the second rat arrived. Bigger, far bigger, the size of a delivery van, dragging itself out from a storm drain like it had been waiting for the smell of blood the whole time. It didn't attack Lin. It didn't seem to care about him at all. It went straight for the heretic, for its own kind gone wrong, and tore the transformed man's head clean off in one motion, almost bored, like swatting an insect that had wandered somewhere it shouldn't. Lin didn't move, didn't breathe, for a second. The giant rat turned its head toward him slowly, whiskers twitching, considering. Then it simply turned away, dragging its bulk back into the drain, gone as fast as it had appeared. He ran home that night faster than he'd ever run in his life, and he didn't tell his parents any of it. What would he even say? That two men had tried to take him? That one of them turned into a monster? That another monster killed it and left him alone for reasons he couldn't explain? They'd never believe it, and even if they did, there was nothing they could do that his own strength hadn't already handled. He lay awake that night, turning one thought over and over. If something that size lived quietly in the sewers beneath his ordinary neighborhood, the city's danger wasn't a distant headline. It was underneath his feet the whole time. He would learn its name soon enough. The rat god cult, the papers started calling it, once the pattern became too obvious to ignore. Missing pets, missing pipes chewed through, missing people, quietly, in ways nobody wanted to connect out loud. Captain Hun Shan connected them anyway. He was one of the city's better-known enforcers, a man who'd built his reputation hunting exactly this kind of trouble, and when reports of a cult worshipping something called the Rat King started crossing his desk, he took them seriously enough to dig where his superiors told him not to bother. Lin only knew him from the news. A steady face, a calm voice giving updates after each incident, the kind of authority figure a city leans on without ever meeting in person. It was strange, later, to realize how much that calm voice had mattered to people, and how quickly the world could take it away. The captain died in his own office. Word got out slowly, the way it does when officials try to control a story and fail. Something had gotten past every lock and every guard in that building, something with claws long enough to go through a steel desk, and by the time anyone found him, There was nothing left to save. The headline called it a tragic accident involving an aberrant intrusion. The rumors called it something else entirely, that the captain had gotten too close to the cult's real leader, and paid for it the same way the heretic on that side street had paid for crossing something bigger than himself. Lin read every version of the story he could find. Somewhere beneath the fear that lived quietly under his ribs since that Tuesday, a colder, more useful thought was forming. If a trained, armed captain with years of experience could be erased that easily, then strength wasn't optional in this world. It was the entry fee just to keep existing. He trained harder after that. Not the careful, gradual pace he'd kept as a toddler shaping his own workout out of tantrums and kicks, but something closer to obsession, squeezed into every hour his parents thought he was doing homework or sleeping. The system, ever patient, kept pace with him. Numbers climbed. New notifications appeared. Quieter victories that nobody but Lin ever saw. He grew faster than any child should, stronger than any child should, and none of it showed on the surface, because he'd learned early exactly how dangerous it was to look different from everyone else. School gave him somewhere to let a small fraction of that strength breathe, without giving away the rest. The middle school sports festival came around that spring, the kind of event every student either dreaded or looked forward to depending on how the last one had gone for them. Lin had spent the earlier grades keeping himself deliberately unremarkable in gym class, holding back just enough to avoid standing out. This time, something in him decided not to bother. He ran the 100-meter sprint and left the rest of the field looking like they were jogging. He cleared the high jump bar at a height the coaches had to remeasure twice, certain their equipment had slipped. In the relay, he made up a 20-meter deficit on the final leg, so fast that the crowd's cheering turned into something closer to stunned murmuring before it caught up to actual applause. His classmates stopped calling him lucky after that day. They started calling him something closer to a prodigy, the same easy label his parents had used since he was a toddler, and it fit just as poorly as it always had. A prodigy implies talent handed down by chance. What Lin carried was years of secret, deliberate, exhausting work that nobody around him had any reason to suspect. It was around this time the system offered him something new, something that didn't fit the pattern of ordinary training rewards at all. Survival of the fittest, the notification called it, without much explanation beyond a single line about growth through consumption. Lin turned the phrase over for days, running through theories, half convinced it demanded something dark or ritualistic before he understood the truth. He tested it almost by accident one evening, eating a cut of meat from a hunted beast that his father had brought home from a coworker, some kind of local specialty nobody thought twice about. The moment he swallowed it, something in his body responded, a warm surge of what the system flatly labeled life essence, absorbed and converted, strength ticking upward without a single push-up involved. Weeks of complicated, half-formed experiments he'd been quietly running, trying to find some clever method to extract that same essence, turned out to have been unnecessary the entire time. The answer had been sitting on a dinner plate. He almost laughed out loud at the table that night, and had to cover it with a cough when his mother asked what was funny. Around the same period, the news gave him another piece of the wider picture. A young cyborg fighter, barely older than Lin himself, already ranked among the strongest combatants the city had on record. Enhanced limbs, government backing, the kind of career path reserved for people willing to trade flesh for steel in exchange for power. Lin studied every clip of that fighter he could find, comparing it silently against his own progress, measuring how far the gap still stretched. It stretched far. Far enough that a single sports festival win felt small against it, and far enough that he understood, without anyone telling him, that childhood was only a waiting room before the real tests began. He joined the school's martial arts club not long after, and his reasons had nothing to do with proving himself to classmates. The club paid prize money for tournament placements, and prize money meant resources, better food, better equipment, maybe eventually the kind of specialized training a normal middle school kid had no business affording. Fame never crossed his mind. Funding did. The coach ran the new recruits through basic forms that first afternoon, clearly expecting a slow, clumsy week or two before anyone showed real competence. Lin performed every stance and strike perfectly on the very first attempt, movements clean enough that the coach actually stopped mid-sentence to stare, before catching himself and moving on like nothing unusual had happened. It didn't take long for the club to notice something was strange about the youngest new member, and it didn't take long for jealousy to follow that noticing around, the way it usually does. Jiang Kai had been the strongest fighter in his year for a while, and he wore that reputation the way some people wear expensive watches, visibly, and expecting others to notice it too. He didn't appreciate a middle schooler outperforming seniors in his first week, and he liked it even less when a pink-haired girl from another class started paying Lin more attention than she'd ever paid him. She'd offered Lin a carton of milk one lunch period, friendly, easy, nothing more complicated than that. Lin declined politely, mentioning an allergy, and thought nothing further of it. Jiang Kai thought plenty further of it. He decided, in the particular way certain people decide things when their pride gets involved, that the refusal had somehow been an insult aimed at him rather than an honest answer about milk, and he wanted an official spar to settle it. The system agreed with impeccably bad timing, delivering a new achievement the same afternoon, one that demanded victories specifically inside sanctioned matches. Friendly practice bouts, it turned out, wouldn't count toward it at all, a detail Lin only discovered after already flattening 3 separate teammates who'd made the mistake of accepting his sparring challenges that week. So when Jiang Kai stormed over demanding satisfaction in front of the whole club, Lin didn't see an insult to answer. He saw, for the first time since joining, a shortcut toward exactly what the system wanted from him. Word of the match spread through the school faster than any teacher could have managed on purpose. By the time the two of them stepped onto the gym mat, every seat in the bleachers was full, and the ones that weren't held students standing 3 deep along the walls, all of them expecting to watch an older, more experienced fighter put a younger upstart in his place. Jiang Kai clearly expected the same thing. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, played to the crowd a little before the coach even called the start. The whistle blew. Jiang Kai barely finished his opening step forward. Lin closed the distance before anyone in the bleachers had time to react, and his fist connected with a sound that silenced the entire gymnasium in half a heartbeat. Jiang Kai's body left the ground slightly before it dropped, unconscious before it hit the mat, and for several long seconds, nobody in that gym made a single noise. Which brings the story back to exactly where it started. A fallen fighter twitching on the ground, a coach too stunned to blow his whistle, 300 students staring at a 12-year-old who had just proven, in one single motion, that everything they thought they understood about him had been wrong from the beginning. The coach was the first to recover, kneeling by Jiang Kai's side to check he was breathing, before turning back toward Lin with an expression caught somewhere between fear and fascination. A prodigy like this belonged in real competitions, he said, tournaments with real stakes, and the fastest way to get there ran straight through official sanctioned matches, exactly like the one that had just ended in under 2 seconds. Lin listened, already calculating how quickly a tournament circuit could fund the rest of his training, already feeling the system's new achievement tick quietly forward in the corner of his vision. Jiang Kai groaned on the mat, eyes fluttering open, utterly unaware yet of just how much his afternoon was about to change, or how much attention his defeat had just pulled toward the boy he'd been so eager to humiliate. But before Lin could answer the coach, before the crowd even finished catching its breath, a voice cut through the gymnasium doors, sharp, official, carrying none of the excitement still buzzing through the students around him. Whatever it announced, it was about to pull Lin's small, careful, secret life into something far bigger than a school tournament. The voice belonged to a school official, out of breath from hurrying across the courtyard, waving a clipboard like it carried more weight than it looked capable of holding. He wasn't there for Jiang Kai. He wasn't even there for the fight everyone had just watched. He was there because word of an unusually gifted student had already reached people outside the school walls, people who scouted for regional youth tournaments, and rarely bothered showing up in person unless a name kept repeating itself enough times to be worth the trip. Someone, it turned out, had already been asking about the boy who'd cleared every hurdle at the sports festival and dominated his own martial arts club within a week of joining it. Lin hadn't noticed anyone watching that closely. That unsettled him more than the fight itself had. The official spoke quickly, listing dates and venues and entry requirements, most of it aimed at the coach rather than Lin directly, as if a 12-year-old couldn't be trusted to understand paperwork. The coach kept nodding, glancing over at Lin every few seconds, like he was checking that the boy responsible for all this attention was still actually standing there, and not some trick of the light. Lin listened without saying much. Somewhere behind the calm expression he'd trained himself to wear, A familiar calculation was running. Tournament placements meant prize money. Prize money meant resources he couldn't get any other way, not without answering questions about where a middle schooler's strength had come from. It also meant something else, something he hadn't fully accounted for until that moment. It meant being seen. Being seen had never been part of the plan. He'd spent years shrinking himself down to fit inside an ordinary child's silhouette, careful never to run too fast in gym class before he trusted himself with faster, careful never to answer too many questions right in a single afternoon. That silhouette had just cracked wide open in front of 300 witnesses, and there was no stitching it back together now. Jiang Kai finally sat up on the mat, one hand pressed to his jaw, blinking at the ceiling like it had personally wronged him. He caught sight of Lin standing near the coach and the official, and something in his expression shifted from humiliation into a kind of grudging, unwilling curiosity. Whatever grievance he'd walked in with that afternoon, it had been replaced by a much bigger question, the same one apparently working its way through every mind in that gymnasium. Who was this kid, really? Lin didn't have an easy answer for them, and he wasn't planning to hand one out. What he did have, walking home that evening with the noise of the crowd still ringing faintly in his ears, was a much clearer sense of the road ahead of him than he'd had that morning. He thought about Captain Hun Shan, about a man with real authority and real experience, who hadn't survived a single overlooked encounter, and he thought about the cyborg fighters and gene-fused prodigies he'd watched on grainy television clips, each of them further along a road he'd barely started walking. A middle school tournament circuit wasn't the destination. It was, at best, a door. Beyond that door stood a version of the world that didn't care how good someone looked on a school gym mat. He thought, too, about Bai, more than he had in months, her empty desk resurfacing the way it always did whenever the world reminded him how large and how dangerous it actually was underneath its ordinary surface. Wherever she'd gone, whatever she really was, some instinct told him their paths weren't finished crossing. Not yet. Han Han caught up with him near the school gates before he made it home, breathless from running, having heard some second-hand version of the fight already twisted through 3 separate retellings by the time it reached her. She didn't ask if the rumors were true. She just looked at him for a long moment, the way she always did when she suspected there was more to him than he let show, and told him, simply, that she wasn't surprised. It was such a small thing to say. It still meant more to him than most of what anyone else had said that entire day. That night, lying in the dark with the ceiling fan ticking overhead, Lin let himself think, really think, about everything the system had handed him since the moment he opened his newborn eyes. The endless training. The quiet absorption of life essence from something as simple as a cut of meat. The stat notifications ticking upward in the corner of his vision, like a private scoreboard nobody else could read. None of it had ever been about winning a school tournament. He understood that now, more clearly than he had that morning. Somewhere out past the sports festivals and the club sparring matches, past even the tournament circuit the coach was already so eager to push him toward, there was a version of this world built for people strong enough to survive giant rats in storm drains and cults that could gut a police captain in his own locked office. He wanted to be ready for that world long before it came looking for him the way it had come looking for that captain. The system offered no comment on his thoughts that night, no helpful notification summarizing his ambitions back to him. It simply waited, patient as always, for him to keep training, keep eating, keep growing. The same quiet partner it had been since the very first night of this second life. Somewhere in the city, underground, in tunnels and drains most people never thought twice about, something with too many teeth and too much patience of its own, was still waiting too, tracking the slow spread of a cult that fed it whatever it wanted fed. Somewhere else, wrapped in whatever secrecy had pulled her out of school without warning, Bai carried a truth about herself that Lin hadn't come close to guessing yet. And somewhere further out still, past the edge of everything an ordinary middle schooler could see, stronger fighters than any Lin had faced were already living lives built entirely around the kind of power he'd only begun to taste. He fell asleep that night still turning it all over, no closer to answers, only closer to the questions that mattered. What was Bai? What was the rat god cult really building toward, deep under a city that barely suspected it existed? And how far could one quiet, deliberately unremarkable boy climb before the world stopped letting him stay unremarkable at all? The tournament forms sat on the kitchen table the next morning, waiting for a signature that would open the very first official door into a career he hadn't asked for and couldn't turn down. His mother assumed it was ordinary school club paperwork and signed it without a second glance, still certain, the way she'd been certain his entire life, that she was simply raising a gifted, hard-working son. She had no idea what she was actually signing him up for. Neither, really, did he. Not yet. But somewhere between a gymnasium floor still marked from Jiang Kai's fall, a cult growing bolder beneath the city's streets, and a friend whose disappearance still hadn't been explained, the shape of what was coming had already started to take form. Lin could feel it, the same way he'd felt that first system notification appear in his crib all those years ago. Quiet, certain, and impossible to ignore. Whatever waited past that tournament door, it wouldn't let him stay a secret much longer.